So Royal Tyler's The Contrast is a fascinating artifact, mostly because of when it was created. In 1777, during the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress passed the Articles of Confederation, which were designed to create a very loose central government that gave states a lot of independence and authority. This drove Washington and the generals of the Continental armies crazy because it made the Continental Congress ineffective. It wasn't able to reliably collect revenues. It wasn't able to enforce its laws and policies. In general, it was a problematic national model because it gave the states so much freedom. When the war ends in 1783, the question of whether the Articles of Confederation were going to work or not became a major issue. And one of the incidents that highlighted that was something called the Shays Rebellion, Shays Rebellion in western Massachusetts, when farmers revolted against the urban, trade, finance-oriented folks who ran the Massachusetts government on the coast in Boston. This conflict got so bad that the Massachusetts government turned to the federal government for help and got none. And in fact, had to send out emissaries to the various states to ask for help. That is exactly what Royal Tyler was doing when he was in New York, wrote his play, and saw it performed in April of 1787. So we see in this 1 year, we've got Shays Rebellion and The Contrast, and pretty much right after, in May, the Constitutional Convention convenes. Washington originally wasn't too interested in the Constitutional Convention, but because of Shays' Rebellion, he agreed to participate, and his participation is one of the major reasons that it succeeded. Now, Shays' Rebellion didn't really succeed. In fact, they didn't know at the time, but the rebellion was basically snuffed out in January of 1787 in the one major battle that occurred over an armory in Massachusetts. But people didn't know it was over. It took a long time. There were a lot of follow-up skirmishes. And so the anxiety of revolt really fueled the efforts of the Continental Congress to develop a stronger central government. So you might ask, why is all this important to interpreting this play? Well, when a country is really thinking about a radical change to its government, when a country is in its newest years, its earliest infancy, it has to grapple with fundamental big questions. Now, we've been calling those fundamental big questions in our course, we've been calling them the tensions, the American cultural tensions. And I want to just quickly look at the large list of tensions that The Contrast explores because of the fact that it's written at a time where Americans are trying to figure out, who do we want to be? How can we create a new nation that breaks from the old failed European models and organizes itself around ideals of Republican virtue? So because those big questions are on the table, The Contrast engages with so many of the tensions we've been looking at in the class, including some new ones. So I'm not going to sit here and read you this list. You're going to recognize almost all of them as things we've talked about already. But one that's in here that's a little new and I think particularly interesting is this idea of democratic idealism and materialism. What we mean by democratic idealism is this commitment to a new republic, this commitment to a new, better model of governance organized along Enlightenment principles, a commitment to things like freedom and equality as articulated in the Declaration of Independence. So there's a lot of principles of democratic idealism that are in the air in 1787 when The Contrast is performed. That larger battle, though, is also taking place at a time of combined economic anxiety and growth. The American economy is trying to get its footing, but it's doing so in the context of tremendous national debt that is disorganized and is weighing more against some states than others. So we've got this sort of national debt crisis where some states are going bankrupt or in threat of doing so. Other states are doing better. And then we've got this national crisis of sort of vision and character. All of these big swirling questions make for a play like The Contrast to become an interesting artifact where we can look at to sort of unpack what was happening and how were Americans negotiating these kind of tensions in this key period in our history. Hope this quick little intro to context is helpful. See you in Canvas.